Faraz. I'm an English teacher, artist, shorts writer and blogger. Today we have an exclusive class on speaking skills. I have invited one of the IELTS teachers from the UK. He'll be giving us useful tips how to do well for IELTS exam, especially in speaking skills. Hi Andy.
Hello.
Okay, Andy, before we begin, can you tell us something about your IELTS experience? My students would love to listen something from you before we start talking about listening skills.
Okay. I'm currently an English teacher in the UK, but previously I worked in China. So I've been teaching IELTS for the last 5 years in China and the UK.
Right. Okay, good to know this, and thank you very much for agreeing to join me. It's really, really pleasure having you with us. My students are really excited to listen to you.
Yeah, we're going to be focusing on speaking today. So the speaking test has 3 parts. The first part is some basic questions about everyday topics, things you should be familiar with. In the second part, you're asked to make a 2-minute speech about a given topic. And then the third part is more difficult questions related to your part 2 topic. Altogether, it should last for about 10 to 15 minutes.
Right, okay. So how would you suggest my students to prepare for IELTS exam? Do you have any tips?
For speaking, it's most closely related to listening. So listening to native speakers can really help your speaking. And practice as much as you possibly can. So find questions from past exams and practice. Write down your answers and practice speaking them.
Right. Today in the afternoon, you sent me a test. So can we talk about each question one by one, and so that you can guide us how to attempt each question, each part of this question? Will that be okay?
Okay. So this is from the IELTS, the Cambridge IELTS book 14, and this is speaking test 3. And it starts by saying that the examiner will ask the candidate a little bit about themselves. They might ask them for their ID to start with. And the part 1 questions in this sample test are focusing on the subject of neighbours. So if we look at the third question, it says, do you think you are a good neighbour?
Yep, sure.
For part 1 questions, it can be very tempting to just say yes or no. But we need a nice long answer. Your answer should last for about 10 to 15 seconds, and it should be 2 or 3 sentences. So not just a 1-word answer or even a short answer. So for example, the question, do you think you are a good neighbour? You could say, yes. That's not a very good answer. You could say, yes, I am a good neighbour. That's a little bit better. But what we need to be saying is giving reasons for our answer. So something like, yes, I think I'm a good neighbour because whenever I see my neighbours outside, I always say good morning to them. And sometimes I offer to help them with some shopping. The neighbour on my left is quite elderly and he struggles to get out most days. So sometimes I pick him up some items from the shops. Okay, so that's not a very complicated answer, but it's much longer. I'm showing better fluency, better vocabulary, and better grammar.
Good. And let's talk about now question. Has a neighbor ever helped you? So how should we tackle this sort of question?
Okay, has a neighbour ever helped you? Well, so you need to think very quickly and think of an example that we can use. Now, the answer doesn't need to be true. as long as it is possible. My neighbour has helped me recently, actually. I needed to buy some new windows. I need 2 new windows fitted in my home. And I noticed that my neighbour recently had some new windows. So I asked him which company fitted his windows, and he gave me their details. So I managed to find a good deal on some windows thanks to his suggestion.
Perfect. Okay. So you mean to say we shouldn't just say yes, no, we should go a little beyond in details. How about tenses? Do you have any advice on tenses? What sort of tenses should we use?
Yes, okay, so if you're using an example that happened in the past, make sure you use the past tense. Listen to the question. The question will have a verb tense in it. So the final question, has a neighbour ever helped you? So the question is in the past tense.
Right.
So my answer should mostly be in the past tense.
In the past tense. Okay. So the question will give us clue what tense to use, and then we should use the tense accordingly. Is that what you mean?
Yes. Yes.
Okay. Right. Thank you very much. So let me sum up what Andy said, that we shouldn't just say yes or no answer because we won't be getting any marks. We need to go in detail a little bit, maybe 3 or 4 sentences. If examiner stops you, then you can stop, but add some more detailed sentences because it's a test of your English. With yes, no, examiner wouldn't determine how well you know it. Okay, now let's talk about part 2 question, where the topic is given and candidate has to talk about it.
Yes. So the part 2 topic here says, describe a very difficult task that you succeeded in doing as part of your work or studies. Now the question always begins with describe something, and describe just means talk about.
That's right. Okay.
Then below the main sentence it says you should say, and it gives you some extra ideas, such as what task you did, why this task was very difficult, how you worked on this task, and explain how you felt when you had successfully completed this task. These extra ideas are not really part of the question, so you don't have to deal with all of them.
Right.
They're just there to give you ideas. However, the first sentence is the most important. You should make sure you stick to that topic.
Okay.
When you do the real test, they will give you 1 minute to prepare your answer. And during this time, you can write down some notes if you want to. So read the question very carefully, write down some quick notes, and think about the order in what you're going to say.
Okay, that's good. And what's your advice if students don't have enough material to talk about? Sometimes when I've taken tests from students as a practice test, they stop after 30 seconds and after 40 seconds. So what should they do so that they can have something to talk till 2 minutes?
Well, what I recommend is in the 1 minute, you should ask yourself extra questions.
Right.
Such as who, where, what, why, when, and how. So, for example, this question is about a task you succeeded in as part of your work or studies. So I would think about who. Who did I work with? Who was I doing the task for? Now, these little questions are not in the main question. There's nothing about who there. But that's extra things that I can add on.
Right.
And why? Why was the task very difficult? But I can also think about why did I want to complete this task? Why did I choose to study this subject? Or why did I take this kind of job? So you can ask yourself extra questions that are related to the topic, but not on the question.
Right. Now, as for taking notes is concerned, 1 minute doesn't seem really long for that. So I think it's a stick to the question that you have talked about, who, why, where, when, and I think it would cover quite a lot. And if they keep on answering these questions, isn't it so?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yes.
Thank you. Now,
1 minute
let's,
is not very long.
it's not very long, yes. And then students are normally very anxious. They get nervous when the notes come in front of them, then it gets even worse. So it's really important. Yes. Don't write everything. Just write clues, some prompts, some hints, so that you can talk about those things or hints that you've written. Right. Thank you, Andy. Now let's talk about part 3. So what is part 3 and what is it all about?
So part 3, they will ask you some more difficult questions, usually related to the part 2 subject. And in this part, the questions will be more difficult to understand, so it will test your vocabulary knowledge to understand the questions, but also your answers need to be even longer than part 1. So now answers should be 20 to 30 seconds and 5 or 6 sentences long.
Right. So like 20 seconds, so they should have 4 sentences for every question. That sounds a little challenging. How would you advise my students to prepare for this kind of question?
Well, again, looking at example questions, because the questions have a similar kind of theme to them. They will often ask you to compare one thing to another. For example, compare the difference between men and women, or the difference between old people and young people, or the difference between your country and another country. Or they will ask for your opinions about something. So don't be afraid to give your opinion. Remember that the test is not about your answers rather than about your English. So don't worry that the examiner might disagree with your opinion.
Right.
That's not important.
Exactly. So vocabulary is important, your sentence structure is important, correct grammar is important, but what you are saying, what's your idea about the thing, that doesn't matter, right? That's what you're trying to say.
That's right.
Okay, good. Good. Now let's talk about question number. Like there are some examples. What are the most difficult jobs that people do? So how can they talk more about it? Like what should they do to extend this question to 3-4 sentences?
Well, first of all, this is a very open question, but this is encouraging you to think about other people's points of view and other people's opinions. So it's not necessarily a job that you think is difficult, but jobs that other people think is difficult. Right. And these jobs might be jobs with a lot of pressure and stress. For example, what are the most difficult jobs that people do? I'd say being a doctor is a very difficult job.
And then go on, please. Sorry.
So choose an example job, give your reasons why you think that is difficult, and then maybe if you know someone who does this job, like think about a person, maybe a family member who does a difficult job, and talk about them using your experience.
Right.
So we're looking for reasons, examples, and experience in part 3.
Okay, right. And how would you advise my students to control their nervousness? Like, what should they do? Because that's one big problem everybody tells me.
Yes, it is very, very difficult to control your nerves. What I would say is that the examiner wants you to do your best. They don't want you to fail. And even though the test is important, you do speak better when you relax. I would also say that this test, it can be done again. So don't think that this is your one and only chance. So don't put too much pressure on yourself. Right. If it goes terribly, you can do it again if you need to. But try to relax. It's so difficult to relax. But now, be confident in your ability.
All right. So prepare well and be confident. That's what Andy suggests. Okay. Now, Amir Shafi has asked a question that is there any time limit? Should we keep any time limit in mind for each answer?
No. If you're speaking for too long about an answer, the examiner will stop you and move on to the next one. So don't worry about talking for too long, but at the same time, don't repeat what you're saying. So you will normally, you should maybe practice timing yourself and get used to answering a question for the right amount of time. But don't worry about talking for too long. It's better to talk for too long than not enough. The part 2 topic, you should speak for 1 to 2 minutes. And the closer you get to 2 minutes, the better.
Right. Okay. Now, some schools are used to cramming answers. So how do you suggest? Is it possible to cram?
Do you mean like remember something and then just say it exactly?
Yes, exactly. From your memory. Is it possible?
Yeah. It is possible, but it's not the best idea, because you then have to be very lucky with the question. Because if your question doesn't fit your answer exactly, the thing you're saying might not answer the question. You might just hear one word in the question and then start to talk about that.
Exactly. So it's never rely on your memory. So always listen to the question, because question may not be what you remember. So don't always rely on memory. So that's what our suggestion is. Good. Okay, Andy. So do you have any other thing to talk about? Any other advice?
Well, just remember that the IELTS speaking test is marked on 4 criteria: vocabulary, grammar, pronunciation, and fluency. All 4 of those are important, and they're equally important throughout the whole test. So don't just focus on one of those things. Try to focus on, try to pay equal attention to each of those criteria and bear them in mind the whole way through.
And there's a question from Mahnur. Is it necessary to use high frequency vocabulary or low frequency vocabulary?
I think you should try to use some high-end vocabulary. It doesn't all have to be. A good mixture of high vocabulary and usual vocabulary is good. If you use all high-end vocabulary, you'll make yourself difficult to understand. But some high-end vocabulary will increase your score for vocabulary.
Right. Yeah. And is it, how would you suggest to prepare for vocabulary, like how to get maximum marks? Is there any set of words which are there to target for IELTS exam, or general reading book can help?
This is very difficult because each individual topic and question will have a different set of high-end vocabulary. So you just have to learn as much as you can in a wide range. Learning synonyms is very useful. And you will notice that you use the same words very often. Like I'm using the word very a lot. Very is a very commonly used word. But we can change that for extremely or incredibly. So we're not saying the same word too often.
I think one advice would be to record your own test and see what words you're repeating so often and think of substitute synonyms for those words. This can be a great help also.
Yes, that's a great idea.
Right. Now, everybody, this is, I think, we are going towards the conclusion of this session. So before we finish this, Andy, any final comments?
I would just say that learning English takes a long time. You just need to be patient, keep going, don't give up, practice, practice, practice.
Thank you very much, Andy, for joining us.